My name is Eleanor Hartwell, and I'm a professional violinist. For 15 years, I've carried my instrument into concert halls, wedding venues, and churches across New England. The violin has been my voice, my prayer, my way of touching something beyond the ordinary world. But nothing in my training at the Boston Conservatory, nothing in my years performing with the symphony, nothing in my lifetime of faith prepared me for what happened during that Eucharistic adoration service at St. Margaret Mary's Church. The night God overtook me completely, and a 15-year-old saint appeared to confirm what everyone had witnessed. I should start at the beginning, though the beginning feels like it was written long before I was born. I grew up in a Catholic family in Newton, Massachusetts. My parents weren't extraordinarily devout, but they were consistent. Sunday Mass, grace before meals, a crucifix in every bedroom. My mother played piano for our parish when I was young, and I remember sitting in the pew, watching her hands move across the keys during communion, thinking that music was the closest thing to heaven I could imagine. I picked up the violin at age 7. My first teacher, Mrs. Chen, was a stern Chinese woman who rapped my knuckles with her bow when my posture slumped, but she also cried the first time I played a piece perfectly. She told my parents I had a gift, not just talent. A gift, she said, was something given by God for a purpose larger than yourself. I was too young to understand what she meant, but the words stuck with me like rosin on strings. Through middle school and high school, the violin consumed me. I practiced 4 hours a day, sometimes more. My fingers developed calluses that never quite healed. I won competitions, earned scholarships, got accepted to the conservatory. My parents were proud. My teachers predicted a brilliant career. But somewhere in those years of scales and concertos, I lost something. The music became technical, perfect, controlled. I could play anything on the page, but I'd forgotten how to let the music play through me. College was a strange time. I dated a few guys who didn't understand why I disappeared into practice rooms for entire weekends. I made friends with other musicians, but we related more like colleagues than companions. The competitiveness was quiet but constant. Who got first chair? Who landed the solo? Who caught the conductor's attention? I graduated with honors, joined the Boston Chamber Orchestra as a second violin, and started booking side gigs for weddings and special events. That's when I met Father Thomas Murphy at St. Margaret Mary's. I was 26, hired to play for a funeral mass. Father Murphy was different from other priests I'd known. He was in his early 50s, with graying hair and laugh lines around his eyes. After the service, he found me in the nave as I was packing up my violin. "You play beautifully," he said, "but you play like you're afraid." I was startled. No one had ever said that to me before. Afraid of what? Afraid of what might happen if you let go completely. He smiled gently. Music is prayer, Eleanor. Prayer requires surrender, not control. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and left. But his words haunted me for weeks. I started attending daily mass at St. Margaret Mary's, slipping into the back pew before work. I watched Father Murphy celebrate the Eucharist with this kind of abandoned joy, like he was in love with every moment of it. I wanted whatever he had. One morning after Mass, I stayed for adoration. The monstrance sat on the altar, the consecrated host visible in its golden sunburst. I knelt in the silence, my violin case beside me, and for the first time in years, I prayed not with words, but with my whole heart. I didn't ask for anything. I just sat there, being present to presence. That became my routine. Daily Mass, 30 minutes of adoration, then off to rehearsal or teaching lessons. Slowly, something shifted in my playing. The technical perfection was still there, but something warmer began to emerge. My students noticed. "You sound different, Miss Hartwell," one teenager told me, "like you mean it more." 3 years passed like this. I was 33 when Father Murphy asked me to play for a special evening of Eucharistic adoration. It was May, the month of Mary, and the parish was planning a night of prayer focused on divine mercy and healing. He wanted live music throughout, something contemplative and worshipful. "I need someone who understands that this isn't performance," Father Murphy said. "This is ministry. Can you do that?" I said yes without hesitation. Something in me recognized that I'd been preparing for this, though I didn't know what this was yet. The week before the adoration service, I felt restless. I practiced the pieces I'd selected, mostly classical hymns and Marian songs arranged for solo violin. But every time I played, I felt like I was missing something essential. The notes were right, the tempo was right, but there was a hollowness to it. On the morning of the adoration service, I went to confession. I hadn't planned to, but I found myself in line outside Father Murphy's confessional at noon. When my turn came, I knelt in the dim box and struggled to find words. "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. It's been 3 weeks since my last confession." I confessed the usual things: impatience with my students, vanity about my playing, neglecting prayer when I was busy. But then something else came out. "Father, I think I've been holding back from God. I want to give everything, but I'm terrified of what that means. What if He asks for something I can't give? What if I surrender and nothing happens? What if I'm not good enough?" Father Murphy was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Eleanor, God doesn't want your perfection. He wants your yes. Just say yes tonight, whatever that means. Let Him do the rest." My penance was simple: 1 Our Father, 1 Hail Mary, and the prayer of abandonment from Charles de Foucauld. "Father, I abandon myself into your hands. Do with me what you will." I spent the afternoon in my apartment, trying to practice but mostly pacing. I'd played hundreds of church services. Why was I so nervous? I made chamomile tea that went cold on the counter. I changed my outfit 3 times. Black concert dress or something softer? I settled on a deep blue dress, simple and modest, with a cream cardigan. At 6 o'clock, I drove to St. Margaret Mary's. The May evening was warm, and the setting sun cast golden light through the trees lining the parish driveway. The parking lot was already filling up. I grabbed my violin case from the passenger seat and walked toward the side entrance. Inside, the church was being transformed. Volunteers were setting up hundreds of candles throughout the nave. The main lights would be dimmed, Father Murphy explained, leaving only candlelight and the sanctuary lamp. The monstrance was already on the altar, though exposition wouldn't happen until 7. I set up in the sanctuary, to the left of the altar, where I'd have a music stand and a chair. I rosined my bow, tuned my strings, and ran through a few scales to warm up. The acoustics in St. Margaret Mary's were gorgeous, warm, and resonant without being muddy. My violin sounded like it was singing in a cathedral. People began arriving around 6:30. I recognized some faces from daily mass, but many were strangers. Young families with restless children, elderly couples moving slowly up the aisle, teenagers in jeans and hoodies, middle-aged professionals still in work clothes. By 7 o'clock, every pew was full, and people stood along the walls. Father Murphy processed in with 2 altar servers carrying candles. He was wearing white vestments, embroidered with gold wheat and grapes. He began with a simple welcome, explaining that tonight was an opportunity to encounter Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament, to bring our burdens and our joys, our questions and our praise. Then he elevated the host and placed it in the monstrance. The church fell silent. Father Murphy incensed the Blessed Sacrament, and the smell of frankincense filled the space. He stepped aside and nodded at me. This was my cue. I lifted my violin, settled it under my chin, and positioned my bow. I'd chosen to begin with Panis Angelicus, Bread of Angels. I'd played it 1,000 times, but tonight my hands were shaking slightly. I drew the bow across the strings, and the first note emerged, clear and pure. I closed my eyes and tried to focus, but my mind was racing. The technical part of my brain monitored my intonation, my bow pressure, my vibrato, but underneath that, I was praying. Not words, just an aching desire for something more. The second phrase came, and I felt the first hint of something shifting. The air in the church seemed to thicken, like humidity before a storm. I opened my eyes and glanced at the monstrance. The host seemed brighter than it should be in the candlelight. I continued playing, moving through the familiar melody. My fingers found the notes automatically, muscle memory taking over. But that strange thickness in the air was intensifying. I could feel it on my skin, pressing against me gently but insistently. Then, midway through the third verse, something happened. It started as warmth, not the warmth of embarrassment or exertion, but something deeper, like I'd stepped into sunlight after being in shadow. The warmth spread from my chest outward, into my arms, my fingers, my bow hand. And with the warmth came a presence. I can't explain this adequately. It wasn't like someone standing next to me. It was like someone was inside me, around me, beyond me, vast and intimate at the same time, personal but infinite. And I knew with absolute certainty that this was God. My bow continued moving, but I was no longer controlling it. I was aware of the music, but I wasn't producing it anymore. Something else, someone else was playing through me. The melody was the same, but it had become something entirely different. The notes had weight and light and dimension I'd never created before. The warmth intensified into heat, and then into something that felt like liquid fire in my veins. Not painful, but overwhelming. Every nerve in my body was alive, awake, aflame. I tried to maintain my physical composure, tried to keep my hands steady, but I was shaking. Not from fear, from the sheer power of what was moving through me. I heard someone in the congregation gasp, then another, but I couldn't focus on them. I was being undone, unraveled, remade from the inside out. The music poured out of my violin like a river, like a torrent. Notes I didn't know I was playing, harmonies I hadn't planned, variations that emerged spontaneously. My eyes were open now, but everything looked different. The church was filled with light, golden and white, and somehow both at once. It wasn't coming from the candles or the windows. It was emanating from the monstrance, from the Blessed Sacrament itself, rays of brilliance that should have blinded me, but instead made me see more clearly than I ever had. I understood, in that moment, what the Eucharist actually was. Not symbolically, not metaphorically. The host in that monstrance was Jesus Christ, fully present, fully alive, fully divine. God himself, choosing to be vulnerable enough to fit in a circle of bread. The humility of it broke something open in my chest. Tears were streaming down my face, but I kept playing. Or rather, I kept being played. My body was an instrument, and God was the musician. Every cell in my being vibrated with this reality. I could feel his love, not as an emotion, but as a force, like gravity but pulling inward, into his heart. And I could feel his desire to pour that same love into every person in this church. The music swelled. My violin was producing sounds I didn't know it could make, rich overtones and resonances that seemed to multiply in the air. I was vaguely aware that people in the congregation were crying. Some had fallen to their knees. Others had their hands raised, but I was lost in the encounter. God was showing me things, not in words, but in knowing. He showed me his pleasure in my playing, not because it was perfect, but because I'd finally let him in. He showed me the violin itself as a gift he'd given me before I was born, a tool designed specifically for this moment. He showed me the years of practice, the discipline, the technical mastery, all of it as preparation for this surrender. And then he showed me something that nearly stopped my heart. He showed me that he wanted to do this not just in me, but through me to others, that the music wasn't for me. It was for everyone here who needed to encounter him, who needed healing, who needed to know they were loved beyond measure. The heat in my body intensified further. I felt like I was glowing from within, like I'd become translucent, and his light was shining through my skin. My bow arm felt weightless, moving with perfect precision, yet total abandon. I was playing faster now, the melody transforming into something triumphant and jubilant. I looked at the congregation, and I could see them differently too. I could see their wounds, their hidden grief, their secret joys. I saw a woman in the third pew weeping over a miscarriage she'd never told anyone about. I saw a man near the back wrestling with addiction, 1 week sober and terrified he'd fail again. I saw a teenage girl who'd tried to end her life 2 months ago, still not sure if she wanted to be alive. And I saw God's love rushing toward each of them like a wave, like a flood, unstoppable and fierce and tender. The music built to a crescendo. My entire body was trembling now, barely able to contain what was moving through it. I felt like I might shatter, or explode, or simply dissolve into light. The boundary between me and the music, between me and God, between me and everyone in the church had become thin as tissue paper. And then, at the peak of the crescendo, something extraordinary happened. I felt myself lifted, not physically, though later several people would swear they saw me rise off my chair. But I was lifted in spirit, caught up into something that transcended the physical space entirely. For a moment, maybe several moments, I was in two places at once. I was in St. Margaret Mary's, playing violin, and I was somewhere else, somewhere that was pure worship, pure adoration, where angels and saints were praising God with music that made my violin sound like a whisper. I heard them, the angels, not with my ears, but with some other sense. Their song was layered, infinite melodies woven together in perfect harmony, all of it directed toward the throne of God. And impossibly, my small violin was joining that cosmic chorus. My simple melody was somehow part of the eternal song of heaven. I don't know how long this lasted. Time had become meaningless. There was only the music, the presence, the overwhelming reality of God's love. I played, or was played through, piece after piece. I moved from Panis Angelicus to Ave Maria to Salve Regina, but they all blended together into one continuous offering. My fingers flew across the fingerboard without conscious thought. My bow danced across the strings without my direction. And through it all, I was being transformed. The old Eleanor, the controlling Eleanor, the fearful Eleanor, was burning away. What remained was something simpler, purer, just a vessel, just an instrument, just a woman saying yes with every note, every breath, every heartbeat. The congregation had become still. Even the restless children were quiet. The silence between the notes was as full as the music itself, pregnant with presence. I could feel hundreds of prayers rising like incense, individual voices joining into a collective cry for mercy, for healing, for God Himself. I played on. The candles had burned down significantly. It must have been at least an hour, maybe longer. My arms should have been aching, my fingers cramping, but I felt no pain, no fatigue. I was sustained by something beyond my physical strength. And then, gradually, I felt the intensity beginning to shift, not diminish, but transform. The fire in my veins cooled to warmth. The overwhelming presence became gentler, more maternal. I understood, without knowing how, that this phase of the experience was completing. God was releasing me back into my body, my ordinary consciousness, though nothing would ever be ordinary again. I brought the music to a natural close, the final notes of Ave Maria hanging in the air like a benediction. I lowered my violin slowly, my arms trembling now from genuine fatigue. I was drenched in sweat, my face wet with tears, and probably not particularly dignified. But I'd never felt more fully alive, more completely myself. The church was absolutely silent. No one moved, no one spoke. We all sat or knelt or stood in the resonance of what had just happened, afraid to break the spell, unable to find words for the holy ground we were standing on. Father Murphy stood near the altar, his face streaked with tears. He looked at me with an expression of wonder and something like fear, the good kind of fear, the awe that makes you realize you're in the presence of something far greater than yourself. I was about to set my violin down when I noticed the light changing again. The golden glow that had filled the church during my playing had faded back to candlelight, but now a different light was emerging. It was coming from the center aisle, about halfway back, a point of brilliance that grew steadily stronger. At first, I thought it was another mystical vision, a continuation of what I'd just experienced. But this was different. This light had form. It was coalescing into shape, into a figure, a person. People in the congregation noticed it too. Heads turned. Someone cried out softly. The light intensified until I had to squint against its brightness. And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the light softened, became bearable, and revealed what it had been concealing. A boy stood in the aisle, a teenager, maybe 15 or 16 years old. He had dark hair, slightly tousled, and a gentle, intelligent face. He was wearing a red polo shirt, jeans, and sneakers. He carried a white backpack slung over one shoulder. He looked completely ordinary, like any teenager you might see at a mall or a school, except for his eyes. His eyes held something ancient and joyful and absolutely certain. And except for the fact that he was glowing, not dramatically, not like he was made of light, but there was a radiance about him, a subtle luminosity that made him look more real than everything else, more present, more solid, more there than any physical object in the church. The church remained silent, but it was the silence of held breath now, of collective shock. Everyone was staring at the boy. He smiled, a warm, friendly smile, and began walking down the aisle toward the altar, toward me. As he passed each row, people reacted differently. Some gasped. Some reached out as if to touch him. One elderly woman fell to her knees, crossing herself. A young mother held her child close, her eyes wide. But the boy just kept walking, his steps casual and unhurried, like he was completely at home. He reached the sanctuary steps and paused, looking first at the monstrance on the altar. His face filled with such love, such adoration, that I felt tears spring to my eyes again. He genuflected, right knee to the floor, head bowed, and stayed there for a long moment. This was no casual gesture. This was the reverence of someone who knew exactly who he was kneeling before. Then he stood, turned, and looked directly at me. His eyes were brown and deep and somehow held the entire universe in them. He walked up the sanctuary steps, which should have been forbidden to everyone except clergy and altar servers, but no one moved to stop him. Father Murphy stood frozen, his hand over his heart. The boy came and stood directly in front of me, maybe 3 feet away. Up close, I could see details: a small scar on his chin, freckles across his nose, laugh lines around his eyes, unusual for someone so young. He looked completely, utterly human, and completely, utterly beyond human. "Eleanor," he said, and his voice was normal, a teenager's voice, Italian accent evident but speaking perfect English. "Do you know what just happened?" I couldn't speak. My throat had closed up. I just shook my head. He smiled wider. "You were overtaken by God. Completely. You let him play through you, and he did. Everyone here felt it. Everyone here encountered Jesus in a way they never have before, because you said yes." "Who are you?" I managed to whisper, though part of me already knew. "I'm Carlo," he said simply. "Carlo Acutis." The name sent a shockwave through the congregation. I heard people murmuring, crying out softly. Carlo Acutis, the young Italian who had died in 2006 at age 15, who had been beatified in 2020, who had been known for his love of the Eucharist and his use of technology to spread the faith. Blessed Carlo Acutis was standing in front of me in St. Margaret Mary's Church in Boston, Massachusetts. "But you're—" I couldn't finish the sentence. "Dead. Beatified. A saint. In heaven." "I'm with Jesus," Carlo said, as if that explained everything. And maybe it did. "He sent me to tell you something, Eleanor, and to tell everyone here something." He turned to face the congregation, and his voice, while not supernaturally loud, carried to every corner of the church with perfect clarity. "What you witnessed tonight was a miracle," Carlo said. "Not the music itself, though it was beautiful. The miracle was the surrender. Eleanor let God completely take over. She became transparent to his presence. And because of that, Jesus was able to touch every single person in this church." He paused, looking around at the stunned faces. "I know this because I'm looking at you with Jesus' eyes right now. I can see what he did in each of you. You." He pointed to the woman in the third pew, the one I'd somehow known had suffered a miscarriage. "Jesus just healed your wounded heart. You've been carrying grief and shame, but he took it. It's gone." The woman let out a sob and collapsed forward, her hands covering her face. "You!" Carlo pointed to the man near the back, the one struggling with addiction. "Jesus just gave you a gift. You'll feel no desire for the substance you've been fighting. Not tonight, not tomorrow. He's breaking that chain right now." The man stood up, tears streaming down his face, his hands raised. And you. Carlo looked at the teenage girl. Jesus wants you to know that your life has purpose, enormous purpose. He has plans for you that are beautiful beyond your imagination. He's so glad you're alive. The girl was weeping, nodding, her whole body shaking. Carlo turned back to me. Eleanor, Jesus wants you to know that this is only the beginning. You're going to play like this again. Many times, in many places. Your violin has become an instrument of miracles, not because of your skill, though you're very skilled. Because you learned how to get out of the way. I don't understand, I whispered. Why me? I'm not special. I'm not holy enough. You're exactly who Jesus chose, Carlo interrupted gently. He doesn't choose the qualified. He qualifies the chosen. You've been practicing your whole life, Eleanor. Not just the violin. Practicing surrender. Every time you went to daily mass when you didn't feel like it. Every time you spent a half hour in adoration when you were busy. Every small yes built up to tonight's big yes. He reached out and touched my violin, running his fingers along the wood. This instrument is blessed now, blessed by your surrender and by God's use of it. It will never sound quite the same. People will hear Jesus in it, even when you're just playing ordinary music. Take care of it. Use it for his glory. Then Carlo did something unexpected. He turned to Father Murphy. Father, Jesus wants you to know that you were right. Music is prayer, and prayer requires surrender, not control. Thank you for teaching Eleanor that. Your faithfulness in the small things led to this moment. Father Murphy fell to his knees, crossing himself repeatedly, unable to speak. Carlo looked back at the congregation. Everyone here tonight is a witness. Jesus performed a miracle in your presence, not to entertain you, not to prove anything, but to show you that he is real. He is present in the Eucharist, and he wants to encounter each of you as intimately as he encountered Eleanor tonight. He walked over to the monstrance and genuflected again, this time staying on his knees. He prayed silently for a moment, his lips moving but no sound emerging. Then he stood and turned back to face everyone. The Eucharist is everything, Carlo said, and his voice was thick with emotion. It's why I'm in heaven. It's why I can come back and appear like this. Because Jesus in the Eucharist is the center of the entire universe. The Mass is heaven touching earth. If you want to experience what Eleanor experienced tonight, spend time with Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament. Sit with him. Talk to him. Let him love you. He walked back to me one more time. Eleanor, will you play one more thing before I go? What? I asked, my voice shaking. Anything. It doesn't matter. Just play with the same openness you had tonight. I want everyone to hear the difference, to confirm that this was real, that what happened to you wasn't just emotion or psychology. Play, and let Jesus play through you again. I lifted my violin with trembling hands. I had no idea what to play. My mind was blank, but Carlo nodded encouragingly, and I put the bow to the strings. The first note that emerged was unlike anything I'd ever produced before. It wasn't just sound, it was presence. The note held weight and light and love. I played a simple scale, just 8 notes ascending, and those 8 notes contained more beauty than entire symphonies I'd performed. The congregation heard it. I saw it on their faces. This wasn't normal music. This was anointed music, sacred music, music that carried the presence of God in its vibrations. Carlo was beaming. You see, this is the miracle. Not that God made her play better, but that he's made her an instrument that he can play whenever he chooses. This will continue, Eleanor. As long as you stay surrendered, as long as you keep saying yes, he will use your gift in extraordinary ways. I lowered my violin, unable to play anymore. The reality of what was happening, of what had happened, was too much. My legs felt weak. If I hadn't been sitting, I would have collapsed. Carlo turned to address everyone one last time. Remember this night. Remember what you witnessed. And remember that the same Jesus who touched Eleanor is available to touch you. He's right there. He pointed at the monstrance. Every day, every hour. Waiting, longing to encounter you like this. All you have to do is come. All you have to do is say yes. The light around Carlo began to intensify again. He was starting to fade, or rather, the light was starting to overwhelm his physical form. but before he disappeared completely, he looked at me and said, "Thank you, Eleanor. Thank you for letting God use you. You've given him great joy tonight, and you've given heaven a reason to celebrate." Then he was gone. The light flashed brilliantly for one moment, and then it was just candlelight again. Just the ordinary church, ordinary people, ordinary night, except nothing would ever be ordinary again. For a long moment, no one moved. We all sat in the aftermath, in the stunning silence of holy ground. Then someone in the back started clapping. Slowly at first, then more joined in. But it wasn't applause for me. It was applause for God, for what he had done, for the miracle we'd all witnessed. Father Murphy finally stood up, wiping his eyes. "I think," he said, his voice hoarse, "we should pray." He led us in the divine praises. Blessed be God. Blessed be his holy name. Blessed be Jesus Christ, true God and true man. The words felt different now, weighted with experiential truth rather than rote memorization. Then Father Murphy gave benediction, blessing us with the monstrance, the same monstrance that had radiated glory an hour before, the same Eucharist that had been at the center of everything. We sang the Tantum Ergo, though my voice was too weak to carry the melody. After benediction, Father Murphy reposed the Blessed Sacrament in the tabernacle. The formal part of the service was over, but no one left. People came forward, wanting to talk, to pray, to process what had happened. Many came to me. The woman from the third pew hugged me, sobbing. "I felt it," she kept saying. "I felt him heal me. The grief is gone. It's actually gone." The man fighting addiction shook my hand, his grip firm. "I've been trying to quit for 3 years. 3 years of failing and hating myself. But right now, I have no desire for it. None. It's like the craving was surgically removed." The teenage girl just stood in front of me, tears running down her face, and whispered, "Thank you." I hugged her and told her that it wasn't me, it was Jesus, but she shook her head. "You let him use you. That took courage. Thank you for being brave." Father Murphy waited until most people had left before approaching me. It was nearly 10 o'clock. The candles had burned down to stubs. The church felt quiet and peaceful, like the morning after a storm. "Eleanor," he said, "do you understand what happened tonight?" "I think so," I said. "God used me." And Carlo confirmed it. "More than that," Father Murphy said. "You experienced what the mystics call divine union. God didn't just inspire you or guide you. He took you over completely. Your will and his will became one. That's rare, Eleanor. That's the kind of grace saints spend their entire lives pursuing." "But I'm not a saint," I protested. "I'm just a violinist. I'm nobody special." "You're someone who said yes," Father Murphy replied. "That's all God needs. He doesn't need perfect people. He needs willing people. And tonight you were willing to let him have everything. Your music, your body, your control, your fear. You handed it all over, and look what he did with it." I looked down at my violin, still in my hands. It looked the same as always. Reddish-brown wood, slightly worn on the edges, a small crack in the varnish near the chin rest. But Carlo said it was blessed now, that it would never sound the same. "What do I do now?" I asked Father Murphy. "How do I live after something like this?" He smiled. "The same way you lived before, Eleanor. Daily mass, daily prayer, daily surrender. But now you know what's possible. Now you know what God can do when you let him. So keep letting him, keep saying yes, and watch what he does next." Over the following weeks and months, word spread about what happened that night at St. Margaret Mary's. People called it the miracle of the violinist. Some were skeptical, of course. Some tried to explain it away as group hysteria or emotional manipulation. But the fruits were undeniable. The woman who'd been healed of her grief went on to start a ministry for mothers who'd experienced miscarriage. The man who'd been freed from addiction celebrated 1 year sober, then 2 years, then 3. He now runs a recovery program through the Archdiocese. The teenage girl found a new reason to live and is now in college, studying psychology, wanting to help others who struggle with depression. And me, Father Murphy was right. I went back to my daily routine of Mass and adoration and teaching violin lessons. But everything was different. When I played now, even simple scales for my students, There was something in the sound that moved people. My students progressed faster. They played with more heart. Several of them converted to Catholicism, saying they encountered Jesus through the music. I was invited to play at churches throughout New England, then across the country. Word had spread about the violinist who'd been overtaken by God. People came expecting miracles, and sometimes, when the conditions were right, when I was surrendered and open, God would show up again. Not with the same intensity as that first night. That was unique, a gift I'll never forget. But there were moments, flashes, where I'd feel his presence moving through the music, touching hearts, healing wounds. I started each performance the same way Carlo had, with a genuflection before the Blessed Sacrament and a prayer of abandonment. Father, I abandon myself into your hands. Do with me what you will. And he did. He continued to use my gift, my training, my willingness for his purposes. I kept Carlo's words close to my heart. He doesn't choose the qualified. He qualifies the chosen. I was chosen, not because I was special, but because I was available, because I'd practiced saying yes in 1,000 small ways until I could say yes in the one big way that mattered. The violin became my ministry, my vocation, my offering. Every note was a prayer. Every performance was an act of worship. Every time I lifted my bow, I remembered that night in May when God overtook me completely, and a 15-year-old saint appeared to confirm the miracle. I still have moments of doubt, moments when I wonder if it really happened, if I imagined it, if I'm worthy of such an extraordinary grace. But then I remember the testimonies, the healings, the conversions, the way people's lives were changed that night. I remember Carlo's face, his joy, his certainty, and I remember the feel of God moving through me, using me, loving through me. That's the miracle, really. Not that God made me play better, but that he made me an instrument he could play at all. That he took a fearful, controlling violinist and transformed her into a vessel for his glory. That he can take anyone at all, who's willing to surrender and do something extraordinary through them. I'm still Eleanor Hartwell, still a violinist from Boston, still imperfect, still learning, still growing, but I'm also someone who knows, beyond any doubt, that God is real, that the Eucharist is Jesus, that surrender is the pathway to encountering his love, and that sometimes, if we're brave enough to let go of control, God will overtake us completely and use us in ways we never dreamed possible. The violin sits in its case now, waiting for the next performance, the next opportunity to be played by divine hands. And I sit in adoration, like I do every day, offering myself again and again. Take me, use me, play through me, do with me what you will. Because I learned that night that this is what it means to be human, to be alive, to be created in the image of God. We're all instruments. We're all meant to be played by our Creator, to produce music that echoes the song of heaven. We're all invited to that same surrender, that same overtaking, that same union. All we have to do is say yes. All we have to do is let him in. All we have to do is get out of the way and let love play through us. And sometimes, if we're very blessed, a teenage saint will appear and confirm that what's happening is a miracle, that God is moving, that heaven is breaking through, that our small yes is part of his enormous plan to fill the world with his glory. I pray that you, whoever you are, wherever you are, will find the courage to surrender like that, to let God overtake you completely in whatever way he's calling you, because the world needs more miracles, more divine encounters, more people willing to be instruments in the hands of the master musician. Carlo was right. The Eucharist is everything. Jesus is waiting there in every tabernacle, in every monstrance, in every consecrated host, waiting to encounter you, waiting to use you, waiting to fill you with his glory and send you out to change the world. All you have to do is come. All you have to do is stay. All you have to do is say yes. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to seek Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament, just as Carlo did throughout his short but powerful life. Subscribe to this channel for more stories of faith and miracles. Leave a like if this testimony moved you. and turn on notifications so you never miss how God is working in our world today.